Good evening with Alaska Weather. I'm David Kramer. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska, get updates to the forecast, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also, call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, I want to take a look at some of the climate records for the Anchorage area. We are setting a record, or getting close to setting a record rather, for consecutive days where all temperatures are below freezing. You can see here with that red line, those are the normal highs. The blue line that's stretching across from left to right is the normal lows. And all the little bars across there are the actual temperatures that we have experienced. Over on the far right, we can see where we are currently at March 15th, where we do have the full day of temperature records. And we do have from since January 25th of this year until March 15th, 50 consecutive days where all of our temperatures have been below freezing. The record for temperatures all below freezing is 60 days in a row. This was set from going from December of 68 until February of 69. And right now we are fourth on that list. For days where we have temperatures at or below freezing, the record is 64 days. That was set from November 96 until January 97, and we are currently 8th on that list. Now, if we look at our official forecast coming up and then some of the model forecasted temperatures as we stretch forward in time, it does look like we could get to these records for the Anchorage area to stay below freezing for that extended period of time. Right now, again, we are at 50 consecutive days between January 25th and March 15th, where all of our temperatures have been below freezing at Anchorage International Airport. Looking at the warnings that we do have out for the state, starting in the northern part of the Lake Canal area, we do have 2 winter weather advisories out for snow. This covers both Haines and Skagway areas, where we are expecting to see between 4 and 6 inches of snow starting around 10 p.m. tonight, and then going until 10 a.m. on Wednesday. Up in the northern portions of the state, specifically along the west coast, we do have areas where we are expecting blowing snow. We have 3 winter weather advisories out, all for blowing snow, with the Yukon Delta area also seeing a mix with the snow. For the Yukon Delta, that is going to start this evening at 10 p.m. and then go until 10 p.m. on Wednesday. We could see up to an inch of snow accumulation, but we are going to see blowing snow conditions dropping visibilities to a half mile or less at times. As we get up for the Bering Strait coastline, that's going to start at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, go till 7 a.m. on Thursday, with gusts getting up to as high as 45 miles per hour. Once again, those blowing snow conditions drop visibilities to a half mile or less at times. And then Chukchi Sea coastline, that's going to start at 7 a.m. on Wednesday as well, but only go until 4 a.m. on Thursday. We could see gusts up to as high as 40 miles per hour. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we're going to track a system that's moving closer towards the eastern portion of the Gulf of Alaska from the North Pacific. You can already see the cloud cover moving in over the eastern Gulf, as well as the Panhandle. To the west of that one, we have a weaker low that's tracking to the south with some lingering cloud cover out by Kodiak Island. And then out west, we have another system bringing in some cloud cover and precipitation, with its front moving towards the western Aleutian Islands. And finally, we'll watch a system out over the northern portion of the Bering bring some cloud cover out towards the St. Lawrence Island area, where we're expecting to see some snow later. As we move for our weather for the remainder of today, with that weaker low out over the northern Bering, we're going to expect that snow to stretch out across St. Lawrence Island area. High pressure beneath that is keeping much of the Bering Sea clear of precipitation, but we do have a lot of stratus underneath that high. We also have some lingering snow showers for the eastern Aleutian Islands, extending out over the Alaska Peninsula, and to the west of the high, that frontal system is moving in towards the western Aleutians, bringing a rain and snow mix to the area with a lot of warm air and rain behind it. As we move out over mainland Alaska, we're going to see some isolated areas of snow from southwest Alaska through much of south central Alaska, then up into the interior as well. And up along the Arctic coastline, we are expecting to see some areas of blowing snow lingering through the remainder of today. As we move out over the Panhandle area, we can see that low headed towards the eastern portion of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing in that heavier precipitation to the Panhandle, where we're going to see primarily rain farther to the south. But again, as we get further to the north, we do expect that to be primarily snow. As we move into tonight, that front is going to push into the Panhandle area, bringing more snow to most locations. Still in the southern locations, a little bit of rain is expected. And then we are going to start to see some winds picking up, especially in the central locations of the Panhandle. South central Alaska should be a little bit clear, but as we move up into the interior, we're expecting to see snow, and that snow is going to extend out west all along the west coast of the state, where our other frontal system is pushing in towards the west coast, bringing those blowing snow conditions to the Yukon Delta area. The low pressure itself is going to be near the Seward Peninsula area, and then down over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. With our high pressure pushing off to the east, we are expecting our front to push in more into the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, bringing rain and snow mix to the central Aleutians and rain to the western Aleutians. As we move into Wednesday, that front is going to push further into the Bering Sea, allowing for rain to extend to the central and western Aleutian Islands, and snow out for the Pribilof Islands as well as the eastern Aleutians. Out over the western mainland, our old low is going to push into the western mainland, bringing snow to the Bristol Bay area, extending up through much of the central and western mainland, as well as along the west coast. We are going to see some blowing snow areas develop behind this, with some stronger winds moving through the Chukchi Sea area, as well as down through that Bering Strait coast area. Up along the Arctic coastline is going to be a little bit drier up there. And then finally down in the Panhandle area, low pressure out by Yakutat is going to bring some continued precipitation to the Panhandle. More rain as we get closer towards the Gulf, and snow farther inland and at higher elevations. We're going to continue to see those stronger winds as well, especially for those central locations. Then finally on Thursday, the winds are going to die down for the Panhandle, but going to continue to see lingering snow showers for much of the area, extending along much of the North Gulf Coast as well. Out over the south central area, we're going to see some lingering snow that's going to extend into the interior, as well as some areas in southwest Alaska. Continue blowing snow along the Chukchi Sea coastline, as well as through the Bering Strait. Then out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, more snow out for much of the central Bering, and then becoming more rain as we get closer towards the central and western Aleutian Islands. For our low temps starting Wednesday morning, out over the Panhandle area, mid-30s in southern locations, mid-20s as we get farther to the north. Out over south central Alaska, teens along much of the coastline, mid-20s for Kodiak Island, single digits to near zero for much of the interior locations, dropping below zero out by Kenai, as well as up by Talkeetna and the Copper River Basin. Up in the interior, eastern locations are going to be quite a bit colder, dropping down below zero and minus teens for many locations in the northeast and Yukon Flats. As we move farther to the west, going to stay above zero with 3 degrees for Galena. Up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down below zero in the minus teens out west and minus 20s out east. Along the west coast, primarily going to be in the single digits. In southwest Alaska, near 10 degrees with many locations that are a little bit away from the water in single digits as well. For the Panhandle, for the Alaska Peninsula rather, we're going to drop down into the 20s, and then in the 30s for the Aleutian Islands, getting warmer as we move farther to the west. 25 degrees for the Pribilof Islands. Our Wednesday afternoon highs, starting off in the Panhandle area, getting into the mid-40s for southern locations, gradually getting colder as we get farther to the north, where we get into the upper 30s for Yakutat and up by Haines and Skagway. For the south central area, mid-20s for southern locations, and then teens as we get into more interior locations, especially in the Copper River Basin, with Kodiak getting up to 33 degrees. Up in the interior, teens for most southern locations in single digits, and eventually below zero as we get into the Brooks Range. Along the Arctic coastline, going to stay below zero all throughout the North Slope, and then down the west coast of the state near 10 degrees, a little bit colder as we get farther to the west. Down in southwest Alaska, teens up north and then near 30 degrees as we get closer towards Bristol Bay. Mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and then near 40 degrees for the Aleutian Islands. For our Thursday morning lows in the Panhandle area, dropping down to near freezing for southern locations in the 20s up north. Getting below zero for the interior locations of south central, and then teens along the water. Up in the interior locations, all below zero, getting down into the minus teens. The western locations of the Arctic coastline, minus 20s out east, and staying below zero all along the west coast as well, to include down through the Bristol Bay area. And then the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula near 30 degrees, getting warmer as we get into the Aleutians, mid-30s there. For our afternoon highs for Thursday afternoon, into the 40s for southern locations of the Panhandle, 30s up north, 20s for much of south central Alaska, teens for much of the southern interior, getting colder as we get farther to the north and staying below zero along the Arctic coastline. Single digits for much of the west coast, teens for the YK Delta, 20s for the Bristol Bay area, in the upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and near 40 degrees for much of the Aleutian Islands with 36 for St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Wednesday morning. We have the front moving through the western and central Aleutian Islands. It's going to bring some IFR conditions to the area. Another system moving into the west coast is going to bring IFR conditions from the Kuskokwim Delta area up through the northwest coastline and extending out over much of the interior as we start to get under some of the high pressure out east. Through south central Alaska, primarily VFR conditions with some isolated areas of MVFR, and then primarily MVFR down in the southeastern portions of the state. Wednesday afternoon, continuing to see MVFR conditions throughout the Panhandle, as well as much of the Gulf of Alaska and eastern portions of south central Alaska. Out over the west coast, that system is pushing in more, bringing IFR conditions from Bristol Bay up through the McGrath area, and then out by the Kotzebue Sound area. Also going to see some MVFR conditions out by the southwest area into the interior and up along the Arctic coastline. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, our system is going to push further into the central Aleutian Islands, bringing IFR conditions to the area and starting to make their way closer towards the eastern Aleutians. As we move into Thursday morning, more IFR conditions out by central and western Aleutians, as well as some areas by the eastern Aleutians, starting to make it into the Alaska Peninsula area. Out over mainland Alaska, we're going to primarily see MVFR conditions in south central Alaska, as well as the west coast and Arctic coastline, and then some IFR conditions for the interior and portions of the Brooks Range. Out to the Gulf of Alaska, going to see some MVFR conditions, and then a mixture of VFR and MVFR through much of the Panhandle, with some areas of IFR as we get farther to the south. Let's move into Thursday afternoon. Still going to see IFR conditions in the southern portions of the Panhandle, then MVFR and VFR as we get farther to the north. Along the North Gulf Coast, some isolated areas of IFR, MVFR for much of the rest of the Gulf of Alaska. Eastern portions of South Central are going to see some MVFR, and then MVFR through much of the interior, as well as along the Arctic coastline and the western portions of the Brooks Range down through the Seward Peninsula. Southwest Alaska should be much clearer on Thursday afternoon, but we will see a mixture of MVFR and IFR for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Moving through the pass, as AKwx should start off IFR and improve to MVFR in the afternoon, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill should both be MVFR through the day on Wednesday, and Rainy should also be MVFR. Windy Pass should be VFR through the pass. However, as we get to the north side, as we exit the pass on the north side, we'll get to MVFR conditions. Isabel Pass will be MVFR throughout the day Wednesday, as well as at Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass expected to be VFR for Wednesday, as well as at Portage. And Chilkoot and White should both be MVFR throughout the day Wednesday. For our freezing levels, we can see our freezing level at the surface moving through the southern portions of the Bering Sea, dropping down to the North Pacific, and then heading back up north through the Gulf of Alaska and into the Panhandle. And some areas of warm air by the central and eastern Aleutian Islands going to see freezing levels up to as high as 4,000 feet, and then around 2,000 feet as we get just to the south of the Panhandle. For our icing out over the Panhandle area, between 2,000 and 9,000 is expected. For southwest Alaska, going to see below 10,000 feet. Then for the central Aleutian Islands, as well as the southern portions of the Bering Sea, above 1,000. As we move farther to the west, out by the western Aleutian Islands, expecting icing above 3,000 feet. For our jet, we are going to see strongest portion of the jet over southeast Alaska, especially the southern locations out of a southwesterly flow, 125 knots. Out of our southwest Alaska, jet streak 95 knots out of the northwest, and then just to the south of the western Aleutian Islands, out of a westerly direction, 110 to 115 knots. Down to 9,000 feet, you're going to see some stronger winds south of the Aleutians, but as we get closer towards the Aleutian Islands, westerly flow around 35 knots. Out of southwest Alaska, the strongest winds are going to be right along the coastline, 60 knots, out of northwesterly direction. For Kodiak Island, dropping down to 45 knots. And down over the Panhandle, northern location is going to see southerly winds 75 knots, dropping down to 45 knots as we get to the southern Panhandle. Down to 3,000 feet, going to still see some stronger winds out over the Panhandle area, westerly flow 55 knots out over the eastern Gulf, becoming more southerly over the Panhandle, still up to near 50 knots in the northern locations. Out over southwest Alaska, going to see some stronger winds through the Bristol Bay area, out of a west to northwest direction, 40 knots. getting weaker as we get up towards the Yukon Delta area, around 30 knots there, and then becoming more northerly as we get by the Seward Peninsula area, still around 30 knots. Out over the eastern Aleutian Islands, southwesterly winds 40 to 45 knots. Then for the central and western Aleutians, 35 knots out of a westerly direction, becoming southwesterly as we get closer towards the western Aleutians. As we look at our turbulence, some of those areas where we saw the stronger winds, we are also going to see some turbulence. For the Panhandle area, below 6,000 feet is expected. For southwest Alaska, including Kodiak Island, below 5,000 feet is expected. And finally, out over the central Aleutian Islands by Atka, below 3,000 feet is expected.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view. And with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
This is an emergency. Please run to the nearest exit.
Let's go.
Go to the stair tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, we have a roof. And so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with the National Weather Service in Anchorage, and here is today's marine weather segment. The sea ice edge will continue to slowly head back toward the south as more northerly winds redevelop over the Bering and Chukchi seas. If you recall, last weekend we had strong southerly winds that opened up some polynyas on the north-facing coastlines. Well, it's going to reverse now. With southerly winds, those polynyas will tend to fill back in with some ice as a little colder air returns. And with that northerly wind flow, we can expect some south-facing coastlines to develop some polynyas this time around. So Wednesday's marine weather forecast for southeast Alaska, we have an area of low pressure in the Gulf that's going to produce some stronger winds, gust upwards to 40 knots in the Lynn Canal or channel there, and also the inner waterways, waves running around 5 feet. As far as out off the coast, strongest winds just to the west and of Sitka and southwest of Gustavus, gusting upwards to 60 knots and 25-foot waves. Look for wind and waves to come down on Thursday. Wind directions will be a bit of a mix across the inner waterways at 10 to 15 knots, waves running a few feet. And along the coastline, winds will turn more, or at least have more of a westerly component, 15 to 20 knots, and waves generally around 10 feet. In south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, northwest winds 30 knots, waves 6 feet off of the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, as well as the inlet to our mouth of Cook Inlet. Northwest winds 30 knots and waves around 9 feet. On Thursday, winds will be a little more northerly, at least in the inner waterways. Prince William Sound 30 knots, 6-foot waves, and then off of the Kenai and north of Kodiak Island to the mouth of Cook Inlet, we'll see northwest winds 30 to 40 knots and waves generally around 10 to a bit above 10 feet. The southwest areas, Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, winds on Wednesday will be west-northwest to near 30 knots, waves around 8 feet. However, on the Bering side, westerly winds 20 to 25 knots and waves 6 feet. On Thursday, still northwest winds over Kodiak Island, 25 to near 30 knots, waves 5 to 8 feet. And on the Bering side, north to northeast winds at 15 knots, waves around 4 feet from Port Huyton down toward Cold Bay. Winds, though, are going to be turning around to the southeast and south across the Aleutians as an approaching frontal system works its way eastward across the region. And winds will generally be 20 to 30 knots. Waves on the Pacific side anywhere from about 6 to just over 12 feet. And then on the Bering side, generally 5 to 10 feet with the highest waves west of Adak. And then on Thursday, we are looking for south to southwest winds around 20 to 25 knots eastern Aleutians, waves around 10 feet on the Pacific side, 6 feet on the Bering side, and then west of Adak, waves will be running around 12 feet with southwesterly winds at 25 knots. Across the west coast, as mentioned earlier, we're going to see more of a northerly flow return across the northern and central Bering Sea over the ice, upwards to 30 knots, Nome southward, as we get off to the open waters there at St. Paul and St. George, southwest winds at 15 knots and waves around 5 feet. But we see as we go through the day Thursday, still generally northerly winds up there over the ice at 15 to near 25 knots with some minor blowing and drifting snow. Open waters, east to southeast winds, 30 to 35 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet from St. George and St. Paul up to just south of St. Matthew. And finally, along the Arctic coast, easterly winds at 15 knots. And then from the northwest down toward, as we get toward Kotzebue Sound, we are going to see winds picking up out of the north at 30 knots. And going into Thursday, winds will turn a little more west to northwest across the Arctic coast at 15 knots, and north to northwest winds from Point Lay southward through Kotzebue into Nome with some light blowing and drifting snow over the ice. A quick check of the surface weather map. We have a stronger area of low pressure over the Gulf of Alaska that is going to produce those gustier winds upwards to 40 to near 60 knots along the coast in southeast portions, and then that area of low pressure and frontal system moving into the Alaska interior, producing some light snow. And the other area of low pressure and the occluded front that'll be working its way across the Aleutians, that'll begin to happen Wednesday into Thursday as we watch low pressure move through the interior and the Gulf of Alaska low begin to weaken. So thank you for watching our show, and be sure to join us once again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.